Good morning, we are Group 3, and today we will discuss the intriguing world of nudging and the ethical questions that surround this approach to decision making. So, first, nudging, as we've learned, is the art of gently guiding individuals towards making better choices, often without them even realizing it. However, as with any influential tool, nudging is not without its ethical implications. In this presentation, we'll explore the darker side of nudging and ask ourselves two critical questions. One is, how is nudging unethical? And number two, are we truly in control of our decisions?
On the premise that unethical nudging prevails, what Aldous Huxley said is very prophetic. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. Aldous Huxley also wrote a book. It's called Brave New World. And in this utopian novel, Huxley presented an advanced social hierarchy of genetically bred and anesthetized human to passively serve a ruling order. But unlike your typical social stratification where the ruling class steps over the working class, Huxley demonstrated how modern science can subdue people without resistance. In Brave New World, they mass produce people, and he had this department of predestination, where scientists modify or damage the embryo so it would only be capable of labor work. They also had this method of conditioning children to their designated social role. He called this neo-Pavlovian conditioning. So if you're a Delta baby, one of the society's lowest caste, you would be conditioned to dislike flowers, books, and nature. They would shock the babies until they instinctively learn to like labor work alone. They are accustoming the lower caste for non-intellectual jobs like factory work, and they do this for all the caste according to what their social role would be in the community. I brought this topic at hand because I think it's similar to what nudging implies. If an individual does not like what he is doing, I could simply modify his following choices into an outcome of my particular liking. And that's one of the issues that surrounds nudging. In our term paper, we came up with an abstract which would be presented by my colleague Nephira.
This paper tackles the ongoing ethical discussion surrounding nudging. After briefly outlining the arguments in favor of nudging, we would unpack a series of objections revolving around the angst that nudging violates personal autonomy. Throughout this paper, we will present vital arguments from each side and propose possible means to utilize nudging guided by a thorough ethical assessment. This begs the question of who really is under control and how far should we allow nudging to be employed.
Choice architecture. Imagine you're a food service director for schools and you run up an experiment to determine whether the way foods were arranged and displayed could influence the choices the kids make. And for that, for some schools, you've placed oatmeal bars in eye level, and for other cafeterias, you've placed junk foods in eye level. For that, you have discovered that whatever the food may be, every food that was displayed in eye level were highly picked. And with that discovery, you've learned that small changes in the context can greatly influence school children, just as they can greatly influence adults. And this influence can be exercised for better or for worse. With this, you can increase the consumption of healthy foods and decrease the consumption of unhealthy ones. And now that you've discovered so much power and influence, there are five possible contingencies that you could take. 1. You could arrange the food to make the students best off, all things considered. 2. Choose the food order at random. 3. Try to arrange the food to get the kids pick the same foods they would choose on their own. Number 4. Maximize the sale of the item from the suppliers who are willing to offer the large bribes. And 5. Maximize profit. As each one of us is a choice architect to some degree, it is our responsibility to organize the context in which people could make decisions. And with that, we should consider if these modifications of choices are intrusive to one's freedom of choice.
Freedom of choice and volitional autonomy. Freedom of choice. Against, some argue that nudges can undermine freedom of choice and hence are not as liberty preserving. For nudges only touches external options, hence one can still exercise his freedom of choice.
Like what Schmidt said, nudging only touches external options. For example, if someone convinced you to do something you regretted later, you won't entirely blame the person for your actions. Of course, there's still a sense of responsibility. But let us discuss the next dimension of freedom in order for us to further understand this.
Volitional autonomy against the idea that one's actions should reflect the preferences, desires, or ends that are truly one's own. When subjected to nudges, we may be influenced so that our resulting desires and actions are no longer genuinely our own. The worry now is that when we are nudged, we are no longer the authors of our choices. They are not really our own anymore, in that they do not reflect our own autonomous desires. 4. Removing the nudge often does not make people any more volitionally autonomous. The heuristics at play and the many irrelevant aspects in people's choice architecture would still influence people's decisions. Intentional nudging can often be avoided, but randomly designed choice architecture cannot.
Nudge, as defined by Richard Thaler and Cass R. Sunstein. So they published the book in 2008, and they are the ones who coined the nudge theory. And in their book, they have defined a nudge as any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. In an analogy, it is essentially helping a toddler walk for the reason that the toddler would highly likely fall. Like all of us humans who are susceptible to temptations and making mistakes, for Thaler and Sunstein, nudging is a compass for healthier behavior. That being said, they have coined a term for the counterpart of a nudge: sludge. Dark nudge, sludge, or evil nudging. These are nudges that encourage the consumption of harmful products. Choice architecture that is designed to make something addicting. In our ethics class, I was also assigned to report digital ethics, so I extensively did some research on this subject. Apropos of Cal Newport's digital minimalism, he cited cases in which I didn't know was nudging up until I read Thaler and Sunstein. He cited the case of Tristan Harris, who specialized in mind to device interaction. He's a former Google employee and a whistleblower. He exposed the methods that they use. They toy with people's reward system, observing which choice architecture would get more click rates and screen time. Essentially, they employ sludge to make it difficult for people to stop, and that would mean more profit for the company. Results. With the established information, we came up with three propositions. Now that we have mentioned that there's a duality, sludge and a nudge, good and evil, now we can identify which is permissible and which is not. It is analogous to a gun. Nudge are like weapons. You can use it for good or evil. So you can't simply blame nudge as evil. It is he who is behind the nudge. It is the intention behind the nudge that should be examined. That being said, we should not generalize that all nudges are bad. Now that we can identify the intentions behind the nudge, it is now subject to a case-to-case ethical assessment. Proposition number 2. Libertarian paternalism. This oxymoron was also introduced by Thaler and Sunstein, which would be explained by RCJ.
It is a fascinating concept that we came across throughout our term paper, and let's define libertarianism and paternalism. So, libertarianism is a political philosophy that advocates only minimal state intervention in the free market and the private lives of citizens. Paternalism, on the other hand, is the policy or practice on the part of people in positions of authority of restricting the freedom and responsibilities of those subordinate to them in the subordinate's supposed best interest. So, at its core, it's all about recognizing that people should have the liberty to make their own choices as long as it does not harm others. The term libertarian here means preserving individual freedom, while paternalism refers to a desire to guide or influence choices in ways that are beneficial to individuals. So you might be wondering, how can we nudge people without being bossy? That's where the beauty of libertarian paternalism comes in. Instead of enforcing, strict rules or heavy-handed regulations, it's all about making good choices more appealing and easier to choose. Libertarian paternalism empowers us to make informed choices, respecting our autonomy while gently guiding us towards decisions that benefit our own lives. In our term paper, we gave an example about healthy snack options in the workplace. So now let's give another example of libertarian paternalism in the office. So imagine you start a new job at a company, and as a part of your benefits package, they offer a retirement savings plan. Instead of having to actively sign up for this plan, the company automatically enrolls you in the retirement savings program by default. So now you have the freedom to decide whether you want to contribute to the retirement plan or not. If you prefer not to participate, you can always opt out anytime without any penalties. However, the default option nudges you towards saving for retirement by making it the automatic choice. So you can see in this workplace scenario that the automatic enrollment in the retirement savings plan exemplifies libertarian paternalism. The company respects your freedom to choose how to manage your finances, but it gently encourages you to invest in your future by setting up the retirement savings plan as the default option. So this example illustrates how libertarian paternalism can be applied in the office environment to promote positive financial behavior while preserving individual autonomy.
Proposition number 3, consent. Throughout our term paper, we were flummoxed by this question. Can nudges be transparent and at the same time effective? Because there is a claim that nudges only work if the recipient of the nudge is unaware that he is being nudged. But Thaler and Sunstein proved this testament to be false, referencing Hendrik Bruns in a paper that he published in the Journal of Economic Psychology. That being the case, we had this idea of informing the individual before he entered the choice architecture environment that is designed to have a predictable outcome. Of course, he would not agree if the outcome is not in alignment with what he wants. So that's the point of it. Thaler and Sunstein also introduced the term snudge or self-nudge. This is basically modifying your environment in order for you to avoid a particular behavior. Why do people do this? Because they have self-control issues and because they acknowledge their susceptibility to fall to temptations. In Atomic Habits, and other book that tackles habits, one of the nudge methods they advise is add friction to behavioral cues that you want to avoid and make the desirable behavior easier to access and doable. That being said, people are already nudging themselves. Well, at least those people who wants to change. But if that is the case, then we could help each other out. With this idea of consent, nudges should be informed beforehand. And the true freedom of choice is when one voluntarily enters a choice-modified environment. To sum everything up, we have our 3 propositions to employ ethical nudging. First, intention. Second, libertarian paternalism. Third, consent. In a nutshell, we have established a duality, nudge being good, and in contrast, sludge as evil. It is always the intention behind the nudge, so we ought to examine those who employ it and not the nudge method per se. But even though we've enumerated examples of sludges, we can still see it play out in our world, most specifically in the business world. It is obviously so because money runs the world. So unless we solve the problem of money being over everything, we cannot really solve the problem of unethical nudging. So it leaves us with a question of what future are we heading towards? Is it a Huxleyan future where we are nudged to love our bad habits and addiction? Or a future where healthy nudges prevail? Let's say all the intention behind the nudges goes to a direction that values our well-being. Although it still insinuates that we give up most of our autonomy, it poses a question. Is it better to have a perfectly modified life, or is it better to make mistakes and be free? How much do we value our autonomy? Is it worth preserving if it costs us our well-being? Those are the questions that are yet to be answered. And I think it would be apt to end this presentation with another one of Huxley's statements. The more science discovers and the more comprehension it gives us of the mechanisms of existence, the more clearly does the mystery of existence itself stands out. That is all. Thank you.